Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures. I'm excited about today's episode with Susie Kataoka and Norris Liu. Today, we're going to be talking about the world of personal protective equipment and antigen tests and antibody tests for COVID-19. So in this episode, we talk a little bit about Norris' story and Susie's story as entrepreneurs, how they started businesses and ultimately started Zebra Health to bring transparency and integrity to the world of selling PPE and different tests for COVID-19. So if you're watching this show, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. And if you're listening, you can also watch by visiting either zebra.health or wclittle.com. And in those places, you'll be able to see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today, including the full write-up from the 13 members of the Zebra Health team that were administered the antibody tests, so you can learn more about that there at zebra.health. So with that, please enjoy this episode with Norris Liu and Susie Kataoka. All right, Susie, Norris, welcome to the show.
Hey,
Thank
Will.
you for having us.
Really excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Susie, welcome back. You were on episode number 1 and we're on episode 34 now, so it's been quite the journey. I'd love to just, for those who don't know you or those who may have missed episode 1, you want to share a little bit about your background and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, so just in pace with this pandemic, everything has been moving so quickly, so many different changes that are happening. And so um, just to give a brief background of Transpara Health, our main objective from the get-go was transparency and access to healthcare. And a lot of that had to do with cost. You know, we were taking a look at different surveys that were happening, doing our own, and finding that people wanted information. They couldn't make the best information for their own health because they just didn't have access to any of it. And so from price to who are the different providers out there that offer different services. And so that's where we started. And once the pandemic hit, then we saw that there was a huge gap and disparity between what was available as far as PPE and different supplies that were needed for the pandemic and what people were getting or not getting access to, and especially the cost that they were having to pay for these things. So, yep, that's Transpara Health. And then we ended up meeting Norris, while we were in China pre-pandemic, and learned about EHLP and ended up partnering together. So I'll hand it off to Norris and you can share.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Susie. This is actually my very first podcast, so I'm actually very, very excited. So thanks for having me, Will. It was actually quite serendipitous. I met Susie and Transpara back just pre-pandemic in November in China, and it was just a lot of synergies, learning about Transpara, what they are doing, along with my startup, which was eHelp. I was creating this the telemedicine platform connecting patients in China and in the developing nations, connecting them with physicians in the US, essentially bridging that gap of global healthcare information, getting second opinions outside of their region, traditional regions, outside of access, getting them access from places where they couldn't get access before using technology. And there were a lot of similarities actually with Transpara, because we both wanted to bring more information, more access to the patients, shine more light, create more transparency in healthcare. I was working more on the cross-border, cross-national stage, whereas Transpara was working more domestic US, serving different markets, but our mission, our goals really aligned. So it was a perfect match, and we were talking about partnering up already in that front. And then, lo and behold, the pandemic hit. And because of my connections with China at the time through eHelp, when it first hit China, China was scouring the world for PPE supplies. Because that was the epicenter of the pandemic when it first broke out. And my contacts, my network in China really reached out to me because they knew I had a network in North America for supplies and trying to bridge that gap. I became this catalyst looking to bring PPE supplies from the US into China. And then, end of February, March hit, the table turned. Obviously, things start breaking out in the rest of the world, in the US. And US became this hotbed for demand for all the medical supplies, PPE supplies, and obviously China and most of Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, where all the manufacturing was centered around, had a lot of the supplies. And I became this natural catalyst to help a lot of my contacts in North America who was reaching out to me to essentially help them translate, help them connect with manufacturers, with boots on the ground, with people that are placed in Asia to help them, source one, quality goods, number two, goods that meet the regulatory requirements for North America, and to help them really navigate this cross-border trade, import-export business, which a lot of institutions, to be honest, a lot of buyers, a lot of procurement managers in North America pre-pandemic really didn't have to deal with when supply was abundant. And naturally, Transpara was doing the same. They were trying to bring more transparency in healthcare, and it naturally extended into healthcare supplies as well, because their network in governments and healthcare facilities and institutions reach out to them, and it became a natural fit for us to partner up, right? And we created a brand new entity called Zebra Health Solutions, where we focus on making procurement of medical supplies, whether it's PPE goods or other innovative products that helps with fighting the pandemic, a really simple and easygoing process. And that really resonates with the name that we created, Zebra. We believe the healthcare marketplace should be like the stripes on the zebra, black and white. It should be just as simple as black and white. And that's where we are right now.
Love that. So before we dive into kind of the nuances of the PPE world and antibody tests and antigen tests, I'm curious just for you two personally. You both are very entrepreneurial, started multiple businesses. For you personally, were you always, like, even from a kid, were you entrepreneurial, or was this something that developed later in life? Susie, we'll start with you.
Definitely not entrepreneurial as a kid. I was more of an engineer. So my parents thought that I was going to be going down that engineer or medical practice route, because I was constantly like cutting into dissecting bugs and insects and everything, or taking apart clocks and even functioning things. I was just taking them apart, breaking them, trying to put them back together. So definitely business, even into college. Business, I said never. Yeah. So definitely different.
How about you, Norris?
That sounds like me, Susie. I was a kid that was playing with bugs and dissecting them, catching big spiders with my hand. I was naturally curious overall. I love to use my hands to build things and trying to figure things out overall. Like, I guess, the stereotypical Asian kid, parents thought I would go into med, become a doctor, but I always wanted to do liberal arts. I wanted to become a lawyer. But in university in Toronto, I hung around a lot of business students, and I got into a lot of the entrepreneurial aspects of business. And even rewinding a bit, while we immigrated into Canada from China, my parents had their small businesses. So at the age of 11, I started working in convenience stores, helping out around the store, and then they had donut and coffee shops. So they were kind of forced into the entrepreneurs real aspect, but I grew up with it. And it's quite an interesting story where I just naturally developed the sense of doing business and also grinding. It just became part of life, and it really came in use, throughout my career in the corporate world, where I got into sales and business development, which is self-initiating and very entrepreneurial and so on, till when I started my own startup, and now with Zebra Health Solutions, where we have to grind and we have to find ways to create new ways to solve problems.
So then, for both of you, starting businesses, starting your own startups, what was the process like? And other entrepreneurs that find others in their space are always curious about what partnering looks like or what joint ventures look like. At what point did the two of you know that going into business together and partnering up formally with Zebra that was a good idea and that's something that you wanted to do? Maybe, yeah, Susie, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So main thing is communication,
Mm,
right? You want to be able to communicate well with the people that you're working with, especially into a partnership or even in, in our case, a joint venture. So I'd say in the very beginning, it was a lot. Even when we first met, I vividly remember sitting at the table, going through each of our companies and our decks and being like, this is where we align. These are
mm,
where we're different. This is, all that kind of stuff. And to be able to share openly and honestly about things as two separate companies, uh, I felt like there was nothing that I needed to hold back.
mm,
Where there was just, and maybe it's just a sense where I feel like, okay, I can trust this person with all this information. They're not going to try to steal or backstab or any of that kind of fear that sometimes might come up, especially with someone that could be a close competitor. And because we were aligned enough in a lot of different things. But I'd say that piece where I felt like I could trust him right off the back. And then over time, as we continued to refine, okay, how are we going to work together and developing that partnership and talking through it, it just ended up being where even our skill sets, like Norris is a salesperson. I'm not, I'm definitely more of an operations and procedure type person, and that's not Norris's strong suit. And so for us to be able to even have those synergies where we
mm,
can leverage both of our strong suits to work together, I feel
mm.
like that just really solidified it for me.
Yeah, Susie hit it, hit the nail right on the head for sure. And especially, when we think about this partnership and how we are working together, it's quite novel, right? Um, I'm in sales. I did 15 years in corporate, and it's always been face to face. With the pandemic, we're forced to work remotely.
Mm,
Really, before we came together and formed this company, Susie and I met briefly face to face over the course of 1 or 2 days, and we hung out for maybe a few hours at most, and everything was done remotely. So there has to be this really transparent level of communication
mm,
and trust that's built in, right? And another thing I really believe in is that in any sort of partnership, whether it's business partnership or even family or romantic partnership, there's got to be that communication, trust, and the values has to align. And I really believe that our values align in terms of how we are as people, how we want to conduct business, how we want to treat others, and that is essentially even built into our missions of our individual businesses before we came together, and how we conduct ourselves
mm.
with each other. So there's really this comfort level, right? When we work together, there's that trust, and obviously the ability for us to essentially create that yin and yang, not mirror each other's values, but also strengthen each other's weaknesses. Really helped in this aspect, and I'm really, as an entrepreneur, I'm really thankful that we're able to complement each other in those ways.
So speaking of trust and good communication, obviously the world isn't quite the place it should be. And so when the pandemic hits, there became a tremendous problem with regard to the moving of personal protective equipment, the PPE, to the right places at the right time. What did you both see that was going on in the industry that didn't, let's say it politely, that didn't quite meet the values and the communication transparency that you both bring to the table?
Yeah. I'll start with just even personal relationships of people that had small businesses or were in a position and medium to larger businesses, hospitals, healthcare professionals. What we were hearing from them is we can't get access to these things,
Mm,
for even people that were working in the hospital. Why are we not getting this proper supply that we need? And When on the other side, on the supply side of things, we were seeing abundant supply. And so to hear from both sides that yes, there's supply, no, we're not getting the supply that we need, that kind of disconnect and bridge is what we were getting direct communication about. And so with that, we wanted to really step in and find that solution, because I think that came from a lot of media and press, what was happening. And
Mm,
like in the news, you were seeing, oh, well, this state, ended up having to buy these masks for this price point, which was like 4 or 5 times the cost that they should have been paying
mm,
for. And when people are seeing that in the media, oh, well, government had to pay that much, that must be the price that you just need to pay, right? Because if they can't even leverage their power to get a good deal. And so I think that's what really perpetuated it. And then additionally, brokers that were playing the middleman, they were really bringing up the price throughout the whole process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2020, one thing we learned is that PP became the new gold, right? There was this gold rush because it's the most scarce commodity on the marketplace. Everyone was looking for them, from the consumers to the institutions, to the corporates, to the governments. Everyone was scouring the whole, not only in the U.S. but essentially the whole world, right? Whether it's Europe, Africa, South America, or Asia, everyone was looking. So this massive demand really generated this wild west kind of marketplace, which just a couple months ago, pre March, didn't exist. And because of this demand, there's money involved. There's obviously lots of profit to be made because there's such a high quantity that's needed in the marketplace, and people are buying, and often buying blind and buying because they just want to buy for a lower price. It's almost like the toilet paper that people are peddling at the beginning of the pandemic, right? And that created this very interesting, let's say, marketplace where a lot of people got involved. Everybody and their uncle, like I like to say, got involved with PPE, who previously didn't have any experience in this marketplace, right? Didn't have any experience in healthcare, didn't have probably any experience in import export, in logistics, but because there's money to be made, people jumped into it. And that created a whole set of problems on its own. And because of the lockdown, because physical travel was restricted or sometimes essentially limited to no travel, a lot of businesses are done remotely, right? You start doing businesses with people that you've never met before. You don't even do a Zoom, you don't even do a face to face. Often it's a phone call from, they could be anywhere in the world, and you have to have this trust, and people start to abuse that. There's always a few rotten apples trying to make more money out of it. So this created this marketplace of distrust from the buyer side to the seller side, and that just essentially muddied the waters for everyone that was trying to get really essential goods to frontline workers.
because fundamentally it was a case where the hospital system or some kind of organization needed gowns, they needed masks, they needed gloves, they needed all this PPE, and it became a matter of, all right, well, who has supply? And so people go through the networks, so and so who knows so and so who knows so and so who knows so and so at the factory, wherever that is in the world. What did you see in terms of the navigating that chain of trust? What did you see happen in that kind of marketplace, that was both good and or bad?
On the good side of things, I think that going to people that you know and trust, so people that you had relationship pre-pandemic, really brought security for people like procurement officers or hospitals that were already, working with certain distributors of PPE to continue working with them. I think that brought a value of trust, and they got the supplies that they needed. On the other hand, with all the new players that came in and previous distributors, no longer getting access to supply, in a lot of cases, then a lot of these new players, they ended up selling Halloween masks, when they were supposed to be sending N95s, or, just not even sending product, right? And so that quickly caused a lot of fear and concern on the procurement side of things for hospitals. And so a lot of them ended up stop buying, which is why there was this lack of supply. Or if they were, then a lot of government agencies had to really step in and do their due diligence and procurement on behalf of a lot of the hospitals. And that just really delayed a lot of the delivery. And for those that are really honest in providing PPE that is quality and original and all of that, then they're just kind of put into the whole pot with a lot of the bad players, and having to try to navigate and really, how do you really prove to be legitimate when a lot of the credentials that everyone is presenting is all the same? So how do you navigate through that? And it comes down to personal relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing unique about this is definitely the way we do business. Everything's remote. PPE supplies became almost a virtual drug deal a lot of times, because you can get on a phone call with 10 people on the phone whom you've never met in your life, never talked to you in your life, and potentially talking about a deal that's worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, where everyone has skin in the game. Everyone wants to make a profit out of it, right? And no one really knows, sometimes are blind to who the buyer is, who the actual buyer is, and where the actual supply is, or where the goods are inventory even. So this created a lot of issues. But the interesting part as an entrepreneur was this was great for networking. I was able to talk to, and Susie alike, talk to all kinds of people from all walks of life that previously we probably would never have encountered. We talked to obviously C-level, C-suites of large corporations, large hospital systems, governments level, even governor's office, or even at federal level in the defense departments. We talked to people in entertainment, famous DJs, families of billionaires, some really famous household names that are out there, and people on Wall Street, hedge fund managers, private equity companies. All kinds of people came into the marketplace that we were able to talk to and encounter and engage in, and created some very interesting networking opportunities for us, right? But on the issue side, for sure, there's a lot of scams, and that worried everybody. But the other worry between all these brokers is really their money. What's in it for me? And everyone wants to protect their share, and that further exacerbated the issue and muddied the waters even more for everyone. And then you throw in another wrench into the whole system, where there are people that are peddling fake goods that do not meet the standards, which is very, very scary if you think about it, because these are going to frontline workers who are dealing with deadly diseases in hospitals. We're talking about people's lives at stake, right? But there are those bad actors, because of, they're seeing green, they're seeing the money, and they're trying to take advantage of the scarcity of the product. They're peddling fake goods. We've encountered fake certifications, fake analysis reports on the product itself. We've had cases where products were shipped onto the shores of the U.S. or even into warehouses, but the boxes were empty, or the boxes were stuffed with other types of goods that did not meet the specifications of the original purchase, right? And then there are extortionists, obviously, people who runs a smoke and mirror kind of scheme and scam, where they are asking for people to put down payments with these ultra large lots of goods that people are looking for, such as nitrile gloves, which is a whole different animal on its own, and just running away with the cash, with the deposit. So all these scams became apparent, and it is a very, very steep learning curve, to be honest, for both Susie and I. And I think, just by the nature of things, we are very honest people to begin with. we were raised a certain way, and we do not expect to be scammed, or we don't have the intention to scam others. Not to say that we lack that street smart, but um, maybe doing business in North America sheltered us in a lot of ways. Um, for the past few decades that we've been doing this, that we don't initially expect people to have ill intentions, because a lot of things in North America, I would say it's very cut and dry, right? So at the beginning, we I think wasted a lot of time, because we were working both North American hours and Asian hours. I had days where I was up 18, something 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on the phones, on these long calls, long sales calls, conference calls, supplier vetting calls, putting a lot of times in with deals that seemingly were very, very good, and then ending up discovering that it was a waste of time, whether the lots of inventory did not exist, or they were fake, or the buyers did not exist, and wasted a lot of time. And thankfully, we weren't involved in any peddling of the fake goods. We, because of our strong process that we had in place, because of our awareness going into this business that we want to be transparent, we want to make things simple. We spend a lot of our time making sure that we were doing the right due diligence. We had the right process in place to vet both from the supplier side and the buyer side, to ensure that once they connect, once the goods are handled and once the goods actually get to the people who needs it, is the right goods at the right quality for the right price. There's no price gouging, any of that stuff, because it is our conscience, our reputation, as well as, it really goes against the principle. So that we worked hard to ensure that.
Yeah.
But definitely it was a learning curve. I would say there were, hundreds, if not 1,000 hours wasted on the learning process of this.
So fast forward to today, Zebra Health. Let's talk a little bit about the company. What products and services do you offer, and what's sort of the vision and mission of the company today?
I can share the products and offerings and things like that. So we worked really hard to get to distributorship, because we wanted to get to the source from the manufacturer and the factory, so that we were sure of the product, the quality, all that kind of stuff. And so we spent a lot of time getting that done. And so now we do have a full catalog of products that we have direct access to, either from the manufacturer or from seller mandates. And the items that we have are pretty much anything with regards to PPE. We are staying away from mostly 3M products and gloves in general, because there is just the black market is just too big, and there's just too much going on there. And so we want to really focus on the essentials where we know that we can deliver with assurance. And so a lot of our focus is on masks, especially because we have direct distributorship from the manufacturer, which is why the reason why we are one of the suppliers for a California contract, mask contract. And then currently, we're also focused on really pushing out test kits. The antibody test kit that we are a distributor of is the only antibody test kit that is authorized by the FDA for point of care use, and then also antigen test kits that are also authorized by the FDA for point of care use. And then we recently got access to at-home use antigen test kits there, and they're all rapid with good performance. We've done our due diligence through dozens of test kits and really whittled it down to which ones provide the best performance, best access, and if possible, quick and cost effective. So that's what we've really focused on in this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to our name, right, Zebra, we want things to be black and white. And we want to essentially shelter people we deal with, the buyers and the end users of our products wherever they go to shelter them from all this gray market, the scams that are out there, to shelter them from the fraud, to de-risk the whole operation to really mitigate that risk as much as possible. Let that rest on our shoulders. Let our process, do that for them, so that they can rest assured that when they get the products, when they're dealing with Zebra, things are transparent. They're getting the right amount, right goods for the right price at the right quality, and that's our daily work, and that's our mission, and we don't want to deviate from that. And the reason why we deviate from certain products and offerings, or we don't want to offer certain products, is because often we found that it's not because there's no market for it. There's definitely a business market for it, and we definitely have the connections for it. But if we cannot ensure that process is solid, if we cannot ensure that our buyers are sheltered from the risks, if we cannot control and manage that risk, we don't want to get involved. All right, and that's very, very important to us, and that's at the core of what we do. Definitely.
Yep, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the difference between an antigen test and an antibody test. So for those that aren't familiar, what are those two things, and what are these tests even testing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, there's people are probably more familiar with the PCR tests. There's right now three different types of common types. Let's say there's probably various types of COVID tests out there, but three common commercialized and tests on the marketplace. The PCR test that people have done, in the drive-through testing centers, the walk-ins, before they travel, the very uncomfortable little brain swab, as they call it, right up the nose to get the samples. That tests for active viruses. So that captures and identifies active SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. And now that process is a little different. You have to take the sample, transport it in the transport medium back into the lab. The lab have to run it through a specific machine and then interpret the results afterwards. And that typically takes, as fast as 6 hours up to sometimes 72 or even longer hours, depending on demand. The second product that came out, in the latter part of 2020 is a rapid antigen test. This is becoming more available, and because sometimes people cannot wait for the results. They have to do a quick and rapid assessment. And the antigen test, as the name calls, it tests for the antigens, which are essentially pieces of the virus inside your airways. That can be done through nose swab, which is not as deep, or nasopharyngeal, which goes very deep into your upper respiratory system. Or there are new ones that are coming out, waiting for FDA approval, that are just an oral swab. So this tests for pieces of the virus. It can give a very quick result, some as fast as 2 minutes, but mostly, under 10 to 15 minutes, you can get the results very fast. And this is useful in the sense where, you have to assess maybe a large number of people. You have to assess them quickly. You cannot wait to transport, or you don't have the ability to transport the samples to another lab, and you can't wait for the results to come back after 6 or 24 hours. Imagine going in for a day surgery at a hospital, right? That's already scheduled. You can't wait, another 6 hours or 24 hours to get the results back. And even, one challenge with the PCR is, between when you got the samples till when you receive the results, technically you can still be infected, right. But that results, right, may not reflect that. The antigen gives you a quick result on the spot, so that venues or institutions or travel areas like airports can rapidly assess whether people are carrying the virus, live virus, in their airways. The challenge with the antigen is that, according to certain studies, they believe that it's not as accurate. And obviously, this depends on the type of tests and their efficacy. May not be as accurate compared to the PCR test, but you get the advantage of the rapid. Now, the last one, which is very interesting, which I think maybe a lot of people haven't heard of or haven't interacted with a lot more, is the antibody test. The antibody test has been around just as long as probably the PCR test, but it hasn't really expanded in the marketplace, hasn't been widely used because people are more interested in who's carrying the virus, because that can cause infections and spread the infection in the population. The antibody test tests for antibody responses in your body, and you only generate the antibody after you've been infected after a certain number of days. The antibody test tests for two antibody markers, the IgG and the IgM. Typically, the IgM antibody is created in the system, after you have an immune response to an active infection. Somewhere between 5 to 7 days, the IgM antibody becomes present in the system. And this antibody test, which is kind of similar to a diabetic test, it's a prick on the finger. It uses your blood as a sample. You drip the blood into the test kit, and it detects the antibodies. The second antibody it detects is the IgG, which becomes present after about somewhere between 14 to 21 days. And what this test can be really helpful with is to test for one, past infections, whether you've had an infection, you've had COVID before in the past, anywhere between 5 days up to months after infection. So there's antibodies already present. Your immune system has built up a defense against COVID. But what's more interesting right now, with the vaccine being available and with the whole world, racing to vaccinate their citizens, is that this becomes the perfect sidekick to vaccines. After you get the vaccines, how do you know you're immune to the virus now, right? The antibody test kit can be used to help you identify whether the vaccine was helpful. Was it effective in rendering a immune response within your body to kickstart that defense mechanism to create the antibodies to fight against future infections of COVID. So the antibody test kit becomes this perfect combo as a post-vaccination tool to help people identify, if they already have the antibodies in their system and the vaccine really worked. And another interesting application potentially is that the antibody test kit can be used to test for the duration of your protective mechanism, right? The antibodies in your system. Whether you had a natural infection, which right now the science says that the antibody in your system from a natural infection may not last as long as the antibodies created from a vaccine. But now, because the vaccine is so new, the efficacy and the duration of vaccine the science is still out. Whether some studies say it lasts 3 months to 6 months to 8 months, maybe a year, the data is not enough to tell. And how it affects different age groups differs, where there are studies that shows that certain types of vaccines may the antibodies created from them, such as the new mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, in the older age groups may not last long, and they may even disappear after 6 to 8 months. So the antibody test kit can be a very helpful aid to quickly check after 3, 6, 9 month duration markers to see if there are still antibodies present, right? And if a booster shot potentially is required down the road.
Yeah. So the classic question that everybody asks is, okay, I think I had COVID, or I was tested positive for COVID X number of months ago. Does that mean I'm still protected? Right? What do you know about the science? And two, what do you say to people who have that kind of question?
Yeah, the science is very interesting. I think there's a lot of studies out there. There's different results. What I read so far is that things to note: natural infections, potentially the antibodies obviously created from it may not last as long. So there are cases where people who's been infected, who's had COVID, and got reinfected after 3 or 6 months or 8 months. And because the antibody starts to disappear in your body and you become essentially a blank slate, that defense mechanism goes away and you can get infected again. And I've read studies where they mentioned that the second time around is even worse. The symptoms are even stronger for the patient. Um, from a vaccine standpoint, it definitely protects you. The studies show that it is very effective in, even if you get an infection, it's very effective in reducing or even eliminating any symptoms from infections, right? So, again, how long it lasts, we don't know because it's so new. People are just getting their vaccines. Large portions of the populations are not even haven't even seen the vaccine, right? So it's almost a wait and see kind of scenario, and people should still be careful because even if you get the vaccine, you can still become a carrier. You are very possibly a asymptomatic carrier of COVID or the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Even if you've had the vaccine, even if you don't experience any symptoms, you can still carry the virus in your airways. So we still recommend mask up.
Yeah. So Susie, who is Zebra Health for? Who are the people that should go check out the website in different sides of the marketplace?
Mm-hmm. I'd say mostly geared towards healthcare professionals and government and healthcare agencies. So, where they are purchasing in medium to larger quantities for the patient population and their healthcare staff, but also definitely government, where they are then, um, purchasing to be able to distribute for their states.
And would Zebra Health be a place that if people have, if they are manufacturers or maybe even other distributors of PPE or different flavors of tests, is that also a place that would be Zebra Health would be appropriate for them to go to?
Yes. So people that are distributors or want to distribute some of the products that we currently carry that they don't have access to, then our main goal is to get the supply that the frontline workers need. So if that's where they're providing it, and they're ideally not going to, just take up the price and go down this broker chain to then eventually sell it to the hospital for, double or triple the price. That's not what we're looking for, right? So we're looking for partnerships, distributors that are that have direct relationships, maybe with procurement officers at hospitals or organizations, and then to be able to work with them in that capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, we ultimately want to become the conduit, right? So there's this callus in between, and creating this transparent, this simple marketplace, two-sided marketplace, just like our startups, Transpara and EHLP, connecting, the needs and the supplies on both sides, but making sure that it is simple, it is transparent, it is vetted.
Mhm.
So what needs to change in the U.S.? What needs to change in the global supply chain or business from the economy or from a regulation standpoint? If you were to wave a magic wand and change different aspects in order to help this whole process happen, so people can get the supplies that they need, what would you change?
A lot. um, Yeah, I'm definitely a process person. And so I would want there to be a set standard of what are the requirements in order to import, export PPE. And a lot of that stuff is in place, but there was a waiver for this pandemic. And I think that's what really opened the floodgates to a lot of opportunists, and
Mm.
but to be able to do that, but not only that, but how can we visually get the view of supply from the factory at each touch point, at each handoff, how the whole supply chain, how can we get that documented and visible, to anybody that is a part of that chain, so that it is I guess, verified each step of the way, that it is the right product that started from the factory and goes all the way to the end, so that there is accountability.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And being an economics student, I really believe in the laissez-faire market, right? I believe in the open markets where it is not as heavily regulated as much as possible, and let the market dictate the demand and supply side. However, uh, having been in this business for, well, over a year now, it's crazy, and knowing the amount of frustrations that people experience, knowing the amount of scams that are out there, knowing the amount of misinformation, amount of greed that are involved in this, and ultimately the impact. Right? We're not just talking about a piece of paper or a pen. We're talking about supplies that can ultimately affect lives, or even um, affect life and death. It really needs to have some straightforward regulation, and to uh, I don't know if it's licensing is required, or some sort of standard in terms of the flow of things. If I had a magic wand, I would hopefully to have one system where the the buyer is credentialized, the seller is credentialized on the platform that is vetted, where you need this trusted platform, is what we're essentially Zebra is aspiring to be, where whoever wants to buy or whoever wants to sell, um, you eliminate the gray area, you eliminate the FUD, right? You eliminate the greedy actors, the bad actors, the scammers, the fraudsters from that, and where people can just have a peace of mind when they when they transact.
So if only there was a technology platform that would allow scaling of trust, so that people who don't necessarily trust one another at a local level could at least trust some kind of platform for authenticity. Oh, wait, this is a thing. So in blockchain supply chain management, could we imagine a world where, both from a broker perspective, the people who are are presenting that they have something or they know something, that could be verified in some way, that then somebody all the way around the world could maybe not trust the person, but they could trust this blockchain in the same way that they trust a Bitcoin is worth whatever it's worth now. is
Right.
that is that a pipe dream, or do you feel like that this new Web3 world could actually bring some value to broker chains and to supply chain management?
I think it
Oh,
can happen
absolutely.
today. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone smarter than me can create this platform, create the system where we can leverage blockchain, to credentialize people that are on the platform, and to authenticate, whatever, if it's the goods, if it's the certifications, if it's the quality or the price, and even the transaction and the logistics and the delivery process that's involved in this. Shed some light into the complexity and able to have clear tracking of the entire process. That would just be amazing. I think that would be helpful to everyone that's involved in this business, from the end users to the manufacturers. There will be more incentive for people to invest in quality, for more incentive for people to get involved in the business, and there will be more trust from the buyer side, to know that they're getting, again, the right goods at the right quality for the right price, and that they'll actually receive the goods that they were sold, right? The bill of goods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not just a PPE
Mm,
problem that this would be solving.
mm,
This is a global issue, right? You're
mhm.
talking about every single country in the world imports and exports, whether it's in small volume or in large volume. And you're talking about different currencies and time zones and transactions and languages and all of that kind of stuff. So, in order to bring that into one system to enable that trust, I think is definitely a game changer for global economy across the board.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say, in the midst of all this, I was involved in some very, very interesting, that's crazy deals. And while I was doing research, I found that this problem is not a new problem,
Mm,
right? It's new to us in the PPE world and medical supplies because of the pandemic, but it's been around for decades in commodities trading. Whether you're trading for rice
mm,
or you're trading for oil, a lot of the scenarios that we've encountered, the terminology that we've used, even some of the scams that people are running have been around in other type of commodity tradings, global trades, for years. And just to give you an example of one of these crazy deals that you would never even imagine, at some point, nitrile gloves became the thing, right, to buy because at some point people believed that there was a big market for it and started to peddle these goods. Now there is a limited supply. There's only a few countries in the world that manufactures nitrile gloves because the rubber from the rubber tree is only grown in certain countries. Southeast Asia, namely in Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand being the strongholds of these manufactured goods. So this created a natural scarcity of the product. And because of the demand, a lot of brokers got involved. And essentially it became this weird self-growth cycle. It became a bubble where I think brokers talked to other brokers and no one really knew one side from the other. No one was really knew, who's involved, who's the real buyer behind it, because everyone wanted to hide the identity, or they wanted to protect their own interests. They didn't want to reveal, I guess, their buyer or their seller to the other party before they got paid in the process, because we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in even just commissions alone. So what ended up happening is this long line of broker chains behind phantom doors that really became the Wizard of Oz scenario, where brokers believed that they were actually dealing with actual buyers, but in actual fact is another broker behind another broker behind another broker behind another broker. So this became a domino effect where nitrile gloves demand first started with a few million units, where it propagated to, at the height of it, I think, starting around July to the around, say, September, October. Even right now, I'm still getting communications from some of these people that we're talking about billions of boxes or trillions of boxes, where which is mind blowing. It's insane because it doesn't exist. If you dig into it, the raw material doesn't exist. The manufacturing capacity doesn't exist. Even if that exists, the amount of cargo ship, the amount of containers do not exist, right? The warehousing space to warehouse even a billion boxes of nitrile gloves really do not exist. But people that are involved were blinded by the commissions, because every penny on a $100 million deal was $1 million in their pocket potentially. So they started having these retirement dreams, right? Buying their private islands because they can now close a 10 trillion lot and end up getting paid in 250 or $500 million in commissions, in really products that didn't exist. And it got so crazy when people started asking, the secondary questions to, how can this be? Who has the cash? Stories became, oh, it's this billionaire, or it's Apple, or it's the Gates Foundation, or it's the White House. And I've heard as ridiculous as, the Defense Department, the Vatican was involved in behind the scenes, and they're funding some of these things. And at some point, I woke up and like, rationally, this is insane, right? We're wasting our time. There's no way, when the Defense Department's annual budget is what, $770 billion, but some of these lots we're talking about $100 trillion right, worth of of gloves, they cannot exist. But like you said, going back to what you asked, if we actually had a technology, a Web3, a blockchain, a broker chain, if you will, right?
Right.
That's involved, that we can apply this, that can authenticate the supply side, authenticate the product, authenticate even the manufacturing process, the authenticity of it, along with authenticating the buyer, whether they have the money to buy it, whether they're a real person behind the scenes. That would just, erode all this mysticism around this crazy wild, wild west of the PPE market.
All right. So all you Web3 product developers out there, I know you're listening in. Please reach out to Susie or Norris if you are interested in helping out to construct this kind of solution. And so speaking of reaching out, for those who are interested in, that are either interested in buying PPE or the different tests that we talked about, or their suppliers that are interested in maybe distributing through Zebra, how can they best reach you?
Yeah, email us, Susie at zebra.health or Norris at zebra.health directly, or you could go to our website, zebra.health, super easy, and you can contact us that way. For even things that are not on the website itself, those are our core products, but we could definitely get access to, basically whatever you need. So we're happy to engage with you in customizing that for you.
Solution. Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably a good segue for us because, we are not only about the PPE, right? We saw the need for test kits, and we brought test kits to the marketplace, to North America, into a lot of the institutions. And looking forward, we're looking at more innovative products that can help in the healthcare setting. Innovative products like, these new type of air filters where in a single pass, right away, they can zap up 99.999% of all airborne pathogens, including, human coronaviruses. Innovative products like sanitation stickers, where you can, stick on doorknobs, stick on elevator buttons, that self-sanitizes and can last, weeks, if not months, after multiple touches, where you don't have to spray down, all these things every single time someone touches itself. And that also, kills pathogens on contact. These are things that we also are interested in and we want to bring to the marketplace because we really believe that there's a real need, aside from the commodity side, the technology side as well.
Mm-hmm. And just want to share that we've also been doing testing internally, because we're not just about researching and, distributing product, but also want to ensure for ourselves that the things that we're selling that we really get behind, right? So we've been doing internal testing, specifically with the antibody test of various people that have had the vaccine, that have had COVID, that haven't. And so feel free to check out the post and follow along as we update and get everybody tested on a regular basis.
That's great. Well, Susie, Norris, everybody go to zebra.health to learn more. Really appreciate your time. This has been super fun and super informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Will.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you in your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.